What's up, everybody? Blake, the Scholar of Magic, and welcome back to a nice weekend deck tech. Hope you're doing well today. I have for you Arwen, the Mortal Queen. She is one generic, one forest, one plains. Legendary creature, elf, noble. Arwen, Mortal Queen, enters the battlefield with an indestructible counter on it. So we're dealing with counters in this particular instance, and this is an enter the battlefield trigger. So what this will do is we'll simply enter the battlefield, and it will come in with this nice little indestructible counter. So that's a nice little action right there. Then for a 1 generic mana, remove an indestructible counter from Arwen. Another target creature gains indestructible until end of turn. Put a 1/1 counter and a lifelink counter on this creature, and a 1/1 counter and a lifelink counter on Arwen. So this particular instance of a card is interesting for a couple different meanings. One, for instance, is that it does put counters on things and itself. So that is kind of an interesting kind of, fact about the card in just face value. When you're looking at like a +1/+1 counters type of archetype, you're definitely looking for cards that want to put counters on things. That is definitely a benefit of it, to have something that actually put the action of putting on the counters itself. Some cards, for instance, like a Vorinclex, we can kind of set these up for you so you can kind of see how this works. Vorinclex, its verbiage is that if you would put one or more counters on a permanent or player, put twice that many of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead. And then if an opponent would put one or more counters on a permanent or player, they put half the many each of those kind of counters on that permanent or player instead, rounded down. So this particular card doesn't actually put counters on anything. It actually just has what is called a replacement effect. And this particular replacement effect will just affect the way that, the way the counters are put onto things once they are put onto things. So for instance, if I have an Arwen and I want to exercise removing an indestructible counter in order to put a +1/+1 counter on itself, a lifelink counter on itself, and a 1/1 counter and a lifelink counter on another target creature, that is the action of what it does. So it's just putting on a massive amount of counters on things. Also, what's really interesting is that that creature also gains indestructible until end of turn when that counter is removed from Arwen. That indestructible counter. It does not last, but the +1 and the lifelink does last for both of the creatures. So you get some nasty lifelinkers and you get a nice little buff payoff. It's really strong. It's a really strong card. And we'll kind of get into like how we really want to exploit this particular card. But say, for instance, we have Arwen and we remove that indestructible counter and we go put it on, like, for instance, a Vorinclex. What will happen is Vorinclex will see that +1/+1 instance, and then it will simply double the instance. And so instead of getting just +1/+1 onto Vorinclex, it will get a +2/+2. It will get 2 counters, 2 +1/+1 counters on it, and it'll become an 8/8 with lifelink. So that's some pretty beautiful stuff just on face value. Now, I think it would be like very important for me to kind of be able to explain like how a card like Hardened Scales works with a card like Vorinclex. Because what you do is you have 2 replacement effects going on at once. AppNap doesn't apply to this, meaning like active player, non-active player. This one, for instance, it replacement effects are dictated by the creature's controller. So, for instance, if I have a Hardened Scales out in a Vorinclex, which are basically almost kind of redundant, except Vorinclex actually doubles. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to order these so that you have Hardened Scales basically be the first replacement effect. So I go ahead and I have Arwen on the battlefield, and I have Hardened Scales and Vorinclex. I'm going to have Hardened Scales kind of go off first, and then that will automatically have an additional counter be seen by the Arwen. So we're going to go to two there, so 2/1/1 counters, and then those 2/1/1 counters will be doubled. We can double that with Vorinclex, so that instance will bring us to 4/4. Now, there's also like things going on with like branching evolution and such as that, and then you can keep doubling, so you get 8/8. So if we had like a branching evolution, a hardened scale is a branching evolution, and a Vorinclex, simply moving one counter over. The way we can stack those replacement things is we could have the 2+2, the 2/1/1 counters go off, and then we can double it with Vorinclex, and then we can also double those 4+1/+1 counters for 8 instances of 1/1 counters. So that's how that works. I hope I explained it very well for you and kind of cleared that up, because that's kind of the the technicalities of playing this game. And if you want to bring this to your LGS, you definitely want to make sure that you're kind of somewhat knowledgeable, and you don't want to get in arguments with people. You want to try to avoid that. You don't want to do that kind of stuff. This is kind of the new juice here, and I just kind of love the Erdon. So Erdon is just really cool, and I just think it's just fantastic. Erdon is going to be especially awesome with our for instance our Mother of Runes and Skrelv. It's just going to basically I think Skrelv though is probably the best instance of this, and that's probably, we played Skrelv for the Mox Amber, but what's interesting about Skrelv is that it can just provide hexproof from a color, and that also that the creatures that interact with the blocking on that particular turn are also not able to interact with that creature. So there are instances where we could have Arwen and basically be targeted by Skrelv and Erdon in the same instance, and Arwen can become unblockable and have double strike, and that's kind of when we're getting into that Voltron damage. So Erdon, he's cool because he will actually he has an instance of putting a 1/1 counter on a target creature. So we do like that. We do like things that can do it. We like repetitious value for the putting on counters, but even because of the card also has such a strong ability, we do love that it actually does do something with counters, even if it's only upon entering. So it just has one instance of putting on a counter. That's fine. But whenever we target attacking a creature with a 1/1 counter on it against first strike, that's fine. However, if that creature has 2 or more 1/1 counters on it against double strike until end of turn instead, fantastic. So giving our Arwen, our little boss over here, double strike is even better. I mean, it's just more possibilities for us. And since putting on flying would be even nice on Arwen, anyway, we can kind of put some evasiveness on this, with a Skrelv, and we're going to be really happy. So that's kind of the action there, and Erdon is just going to be great here because we're going to have multiple instances of creatures always having additional counters on it, and double strike is a very powerful configuration for these colors, and probably rare too. I can foresee probably a Leyline Axe kind of also have that kind of synergy, but more often than not, double strike is not very common with these white colors. Okay, so there is that, and now we're just going to kind of get into the juice of the deck and kind of explain kind of exactly what kind of makes this commander tick. So what we really want to see with Arwen, because she does enter with an indestructibility counter, is we want to have ways of providing additional indestructibility counters. It's not really in our best interest on most circumstances to exhaust that indestructibility counter, even if maybe we have a juicy attack kind of lined up, just because the only other way of getting that indestructibility counter on it is for Arwen to perish. We don't really have another way to summon up an indestructible counter. However, we do have the ability to basically provide more of those indestructibility counters, and Lae'zel is one of those cards that could help do that. So for instance, if I have a Lae'zel on the battlefield, and then I go ahead and cast Arwen, Lazal will see that indestructibility counter being put on Arwen and will put an additional indestructibility counter on it. If you would put one or more counters on a creature or a planeswalker you control or on yourself, put that many plus one of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead. So that would be an instance of this. There's also ways to proliferate in our particular deck. So Lazal wouldn't be lost if we are just like, having Lazal and Arwen, and perhaps Arwen came in before Lazal. As long as we're proliferating, we can, keep adding additional indestructibility counters. And I'd say that's kind of really the juice. If we can add 4 instances of indestructibility counters on Arwen, and we're just kind of keeping that up for protecting our stuff, and just basically able to get very explosive on particular turns with our counter, that's when we're really doing the stuff. Similarly, Peer is also going to do that as well. So that one's also just fantastic here. And it is very redundant for these particular 2 cards. So it's just the stats are a little bit different. If one or more counters we put on a permanent your team controls, that many plus one of each of those kinds of counters are put on that permanent instead. This also works with our planeswalkers, and Lazal also does that as well. So we're just very happy with all this. It's just kind of amazing stuff. Now let's talk about kind of key cards. This one is a card that kind of represents that versatility, and at the 2 spot, it's very appropriately costed for us and very versatile. The fact that it can go ahead and put a 1/1 counter on a target creature upon entering or proliferate kind of gives us that kind of versatility. And we do like that kind of those cards that kind of offer us either one, right? Perhaps we might want to put counters on something to kind of get over the finish line or get started and getting moving. Additionally, just the act that this can proliferate for just 2 mana is just a nice thing on a creature. It's just nice. So again, put a 1/1 counter on target creature, and what 1/1 means is just the power and toughness increase in case we're new players. So for instance, if I put a 1/1 counter on this Pollen Bright Druid, it will be a 2/2 instead of a 1/1. Of course, if this already had a counter on it, like a 1/1 counter on it, and we proliferated with another creature, an additional 1/1 counter would be put on this, so it'd be a 3/3. Similarly, with the Arwen, if she had 2 indestructible counters on it and we proliferated, she would get an additional indestructible counter, and she would have 3. So proliferate is probably our big major kind of juice. We have some amazing lands here, like for instance, a Karn's Bastion. That's just for 4 mana and a tap. That's a proliferate or add colorless. Fantastic. Just love to have that on a land. A beautiful thing. This is probably the newest hot stuff is the Metastatic Evangel from Modern Horizon 3, an uncommon, if you could believe that. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield in your control, proliferate. Simply be rewarded for playing your creatures. Amazing. That's a lot of proliferation. This staff is just out of bounds. We do not care about the life loss. We have so much life in this deck. You're going to notice you're going to have 50. Well, you're going to start with 40. You're going to notice that you're going to have about 80 hit points of life. On any given game, your life total is going to rise. You're going to be very hard to kill, simply because of all the life linkers that Arwen puts on the battlefield, and they're so high powered. So this thing will just basically proliferate. We're going to be using it for that proliferate. We can also draw with it. We can add mana. It's just an absolute bomb for us. It's a masterpiece. Staff of Completion is a mega card. Norn's Choir Master. This was recommended by the community, so thanks, guys. This is a big card for a lot of the people that love to play Arwen. Of course, it just provides that nice flyer, which is nice. And then, of course, whenever Arwen does enter or attacks, we will proliferate. Fantastic. Thirsting Roots. This is just that very versatile card. And of course, what we do love about this one is that it can always just fetch up a basic land if we need to, or it can just proliferate. It's fantastic for us. Now proliferate. It's just amongst all our stuff, so that you're really popping. Once you put counters on stuff, all your stuff, and you proliferate, you're putting additional counter of each kind that's already there. So you're just really like rocking and rolling. It's like a widespread kind of effect. So it's really something to behold. Graceful Apparition. This thing on curve is fantastic with Arwen. Play this on turn 2, and then play Arwen on turn 3, and then all of a sudden you have an Arwen and the extra indestructibility counter on it is amazing. Arwen will fold to exile. That's pretty much the thing about it. So we will play some protection creatures. We will play some like cheap interaction. That's really the only kind of weakness, like your Terra Sunders, your Sunfalls, those type of things that kind of are harder for Arwen. But really, if the opponent doesn't have exile, they're going to be in big trouble, because Arwen with like just 2 indestructibility counters on it is a big force, and it's really going to get out of hand really fast. Just because it dishes out so many counters and lifelink at once, it's a really big problem. Tinkerbloom always like kind of plays better than it looks. It's just kind of can come down as like a chonky card, you know. It can, you know, be versatile and remove things. It can also proliferate by paying that 1 generic mana. So it's fantastic. I like the Tinkerbloom in this deck. Bloated Contaminator also is an all-star. This thing just tramples in, goes ahead and proliferates. Can get that toxic kind of going. We don't really, you know, we're not really leaning into that, but just the fact that it just gets in and proliferates is just fantastic. Really, really appropriately cost for us. Great Henge is probably like the card, and I will kind of just bring this over here to as a little advertisement, but just simply comment on this video and be eligible for a giveaway for the foil Great Henge and the Sensei's Divining Top. I'll pick a video at 400 subscribers, and then I'll randomize the contents from that particular video. All will be done through that video on the 400 subs, and I will kind of detail it and do it in that manner. So it'll be kind of fun, and it's always kind of fun. And we always have a viewer that he usually wins because he comments, but it's okay. He deserves it. And he has some cards in this deck, so you'll see, that are recommended, and I think they're fantastic. But you know, we'll see. You guys just have to say, what's up? You know, what's up? And that'll be cool, and like the video. Here's the Great Henge. This card is perfect for this deck. It does everything what we want it to do. It's going to provide us some ramp. It's going to provide counters on our creatures when they enter, and it's going to draw. It's fantastic. The Great Henge can be played pretty cheaply in this deck. You know, you're not going to be sad about playing it like, you know, for 4 mana, a 4 mana cost either. But, you know, you sometimes get that 2 mana Henge, which is kind of really nice, huh? Here's the Invasion of Gobakhan. And this one is just really cool, isn't it? This one is really cool for us because we can get into somebody's hand, so that's kind of nice. And then once we flip this by dealing it 3 damage, we get this kind of protection spell. And additionally, for the creatures that attack on a given turn, they get a 1/1 counter placed on them. It's a really busted card. If there's like some cards that kind of stand out to me, and I'm like, wow, I think like that card is really good. Invasion of Gobakhan is like definitely a really good card, and maybe still underpriced. I think it's like a $3 card. Still, it's right there, right? And Innkeeper's Talent is kind of the new hot stuff, where this thing just provides repeatable counters. So that's what I was talking about. Things that provide repeatable counters if they stick on the battlefield for durations of turns. So at the beginning of combat in your turn, put a 1/1 counter on target creature control. That's de facto. You can pump it up for 1 forest. Permanents control with counters on them have ward 1. That's really nice. Then the 3 generic 1 green once you've already leveled 2. If you would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, put twice that many of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead. So that doubling effect is really hot stuff. And you know, we could double our proliferations. Our planeswalkers would enter with double loyalty. Things that enter with counters already would enter with double counters. So it's just really effective stuff. Really cool. Oh my God. Collector's Cage. Yo! Collector's Cage. So sick. Such a cheap card for its mana costs. And then we get to put like counters on things. We get to do the hideaway. And we play lots of creatures, so it's really not too hard to set off the Collector's Cage. Whatever it gets into, it gets into. I mean, it can get into a Henge. It can get into a Vorinclex. We have some really nasty 5-drops in here. There's really nasty stuff. So just putting counters on stuff, having that criteria of three more creatures on the battlefield with different powers when you put that counter on. And then, of course, this goes onto the stack, and then you get your nice little card there. So it's beautiful. Collector's Cage, Agatha's Soul Cauldron. This is just another cool one where we can get into the graveyards of our opponents or ourselves and basically continue to put those counters on. It has to be creatures that you exiled with this particular one. And then when the creature card is exiled, put a 1/1 counter on target creature control. So creatures you control, 1/1 counters on them have all active abilities of all creature cards exiled with the Agatha's Soul Cauldron. So that can get kind of out of hand kind of fast because all of our creatures are going to have 1/1 counters on it. So that's also a Vahn suggestion. So there's the Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Rishkar Pima Renegade. This one is really cool. This one is, this probably can come on the battlefield and we're already going to have creatures with counters on them. So they're already going to be able to produce for mana. In addition, it can also just place those counters initially and make itself a mana dork. It can turn another thing that might not have been a mana dork into a mana dork. And it also just places counters on things. So it's really nice. Fight Rigging. So this one wants to see the 7 power or greater for the criteria of once you put that 1/1 counter on there. So that's definitely doable. Our creatures definitely get strong. The Hideaway 5 is also nice too. So once we do set that off, we can just have that that card cast without paying its mana cost. So that's really nice. Jugan Defends the Temple. This is just like kind of just another I do everything for you kind of card. I'm going to create, a mana dork for you. I'm going to put counters on some creatures on chapter 2. And then I'm going to make a really sweet creature here. And it is really sweet. And it really synergizes really well. It really helps get our creatures kind of over the finish line too. And also it becomes a pretty nasty threat itself. Like once you have the 5 or more modified creatures, like creatures that have like counters, for instance, are considered modifications. And really, it's nice because you can just cast, like, for instance, like a Llanowar Elf, and perhaps that's really like maybe what your play was. And then you can just mana sink into that and pay X. And when you do, put X1 counters on that creature. So, yeah, it's just really nice stuff. So whenever a creature you control enters the battlefield, you can pay X and just buff it up by X. So, and you get a nice flyer. So I like that card a lot. Here's Tribute to the World Tree. Just loves to see creatures enter the battlefield, no matter what their power is. Of course, we can draw if they're power 3 or greater. Otherwise, we're going to put 2/1 counters on it. It's fantastic. Ajani, this one is kind of like the one that kind of stands out to me, especially for that kind of doubling season type of effect, because we are going to have so much life. I felt like this ultimate is really good. This is probably another, like, I think, kind of underpriced card for me. I like that it can repeatedly put counters on things. And then also that -3 can also provide that win con if Arwen gets strong enough. We can hit that flying and double strike until end of turn and perhaps get him for the commander lethal. So we'd love all that. Making, 82/2 cats is also a big threat. Ajani, the sleeper agent, is also just that really nice card. I just love that -3. It gives the counters, just spreads out the counters. It just really pumps up our squad. It can also just get into that -6 pretty easily with that doubling effect. Not the worst, right? Starting to cast creature spells, target opponent gets poison counters. And then that +1 is not the greatest, but if we happen to do hit like a creature or planeswalker card, we can put that into our hand or bottom it. So now we're coming into the cards that kind of have either passive abilities or they do put counters on things. This one actually does both. So it will act like a hardened scales type of effect. So it will put that additional 1/1 counter on things when 1/1 counters are put onto something. So for instance, if Arwen is on the battlefield, this is and Erdan comes on the battlefield and he enters and puts a 1/1 counter. And Arwen was just a 2/2, it would, instead of being a 3/3, it would be a 4/4. So that's how it works. This one can also electively put counters on things, and it can only be activated as a sorcery. But that is a nice little effect as well. We love the Ozolith. Here's the Goldvein Hydra. This is just kind of a nasty one. It could get really strong. It can be very people don't really want to interact with it or destroy it, we can ramp quite heavily with it. It just has all those nice keywords: vigilance, trample, haste. Trample is a really big part of our game plan. It can help us get in and kind of break parity and finish the game. So yeah, the trample is very good on the Goldvine Hydra. The fact that it puts the counters on itself is very nice. Primordial Hydra is probably one of the more nasty cards. And I just was at my LGS and I was going through my binder and I was like, well, that'd be great for my Arwen deck. You know, it puts the counters on when it enters. And then at the beginning of our upkeep, it will also double its counters as well. It will actually do its doubling itself, which is really fantastic. And that could get out of hand pretty fast, huh? And then it has trample as long as it has 10 or more 1/1 counters on it. Fantastic. Here's a Forgotten Ancient. This is also an interesting one. Like, it's just great for multiplayer. It's going to see other players, you know, put 1/1 counters on their stuff or cast spells, and then it's going to put counters on itself. And then additionally at the upkeep, we can divvy up the counters as well. And you can see, like, by placing counters on things, that is like a really big part, like, of this kind of archetype. The ability for something to put counters onto something works in, and it works in with, like, these, for instance, these hardened scales, where if I divvy up the counters with a Forgotten Ancient, I have hardened scales. The act of putting counters is being put on, and it kind of has that kind of snowball effect where we get that additional counter for each instance. So yeah, we love the Forgotten Ancient here. Fantastic. Here's the Conclave Mentor. If one or more 1/1 counters will be put on a creature you control, that many plus 1/1 counters are put on that creature instead. When Conclave Mentor dies, you gain life equal to its power. Fantastic. Here's Branching Evolution. Kind of discussed that. This actually it does like the twice that many counters. So it is definitely the one, how you want to order it, you know, and how you want to double it. Can kind of get very interesting, especially like with a Goldvine Hydra type effect, you know, where basically counters are being put on and they're doubled. It can kind of get a little bit tricky, but just kind of keep in mind my explanation of the replacement effects in the beginning of the kind of video, and it should help you out pretty well with that. Angel of Destiny is definitely is a menace. You know, you can really kind of, if an opponent is particularly threatening, you know, pop down an Angel of Destiny, like for instance, perhaps with your Collector's Cage or fight rigging. You can have instances where Arwen has a couple indestructible counters ready to go and ready for that lifelink. And perhaps the next turn when you swing with Angel of Destiny, you can just pump up your squad a little bit more, and you're usually going to reach that criteria of having 15 more life. And as long as Angel of Destiny had attacked that particular player and lived through the attack, because you have to get to end step, then that particular player will just lose. So that is a really, really devastating card. It really is probably one of our nastier win cons in here, but it is very cool and very clever. So let's talk about, like, you know, the Landfall kind of package, because we do have like a Landfall package here. Probably one of the better proliferators in our deck is the Evolution Sage. Whenever land enters battlefield under your control, proliferate. Obviously, this card in like a Bristly Bill deck goes off if you're familiar with that. Otherwise, just having, like, you know, abundance of fetch lands in your deck can really kind of set this off. Having Arwen have, you know, even two more indestructible counters than it started off with is just amazing. And the simple investment of just having an Evolution Sage and having a fetch land come down and, you know, cracking that fetch and having those indestructible counters accrue is just amazing. And then buffing up all your other counter synergy is just kind of nuts all at the same time. So we will play a Lotus Cobra. Lotus Cobra is just busted, just absolutely busted card. Just loves to see lands hit the board. Skycath Cub is the new thing, the new hot Landfall card. This thing is amazing because it will do that instances of putting counters on stuff when lands come on the battlefield. And if an additional land has entered the battlefield, you'll double the counters on that creature instead. So it's just kind of amazing. It's just a really amazing card. And it has trample, like, for whatever reason. What a nasty card that is. Definitely worth that. Very hard to get. You know, I never actually pulled it from my 3 boxes of Jumpstart. I did pull Landfall like 3 or 4 times, But I never pulled a Cath, the Sky Cath Cub. It was hard. It was hard to achieve that. I had to get that at the LGS. Bristly Bill, just another nasty landfall card. Once again, just putting counters on things. That elective kind of way of repeatably doing that is really strong. This is our really big juice. This is where all the juice is. Yeah, if you can get like these kind of cards going with Arwen, it's just going to be very difficult for your opponent to keep up. In addition, it can double the amount of 1/1 counters on each creature you control with that mana sink, so it's just fantastic. Ordeal of Nylea is that really sneaky one where it's going to add counters as we attack. And then if a card has 3 or more 1/1 counters on it, you sacrifice this aura. And when you do so, you're going to be able to Vastwood Surge or basically put 2 basic lands immediately onto the battlefield tapped. So some big landfall action there. Really goes well with our Hydras that just have like pure counters on them. Really works well, for instance, with like the Gold Vein Hydra. You know, there's a couple new Hydras out. I just simply don't have all of them. I can definitely see like their merits for them. There's one that just basically is a landfall Hydra, and it just grows as lands come in. So that's omitted from this particular list, but you might consider it for yours. And find the cut that you need to do. Kodama of the West Tree. This one is just a nasty thing. It's going to give trample to all our modified creatures, and when they connect, we're going to be able to fetch up a basic for each instance of that combat damage and put it right on the battlefield tap. Really good menacing card. Very, very, very strong. Very good for all your matchups. Nissa will just be that kind of beautiful card to fetch up elementals or elves from our deck when we do have instances of extra lands coming on the battlefield, and act as a nice little mana dork at the same time. Fantastic. And then we have all our fetch lands here that I just wanted to kind of demonstrate. So there's those, the Vista, the Fable Passage. So we just have a nice little kind of array of fetches here. There's the Windswept Teeth. So that's kind of our landfall package. Here's some just interesting cards, like overall, they kind of just set off our synergy. Obviously, we have we have a little bit of life gain kind of action that we benefit from. This creature just comes on the battlefield as a 6/6 lifelinker for 1 mana, so it's completely whacked. But it also sets off our synergies too for like the Great Henge. We play Rishkar's Expertise, our Fight Rigging. This card is going to kind of get us into that action a little bit faster, so it definitely has a nice little home here. Mother of Runes is a fantastic just protection spell. You could play Giver of Runes too. This is just what I had available. So target creature you control gains protection from color of your choice until end of turn. So the indestructibility is good, but this could give us, protection from those instances of exiling, single target exiling spells. So we play the Mother of Runes, we play the Skrelv. All these are just very, appropriate. Esper Sentinel is that nice little card advantage. So we're kind of getting to our card advantage, just cheap card advantage for the table, and basically, when an opponent doesn't want to pay that tax for their non-creature spells, where the X is Esper Sentinel's power, we will draw. We can actually have this grow too pretty significantly with our counter synergy. Sylvan Library, also just like a really good kind of card advantage spell. We don't mind about losing all the life because we do gain so much of it. There's Rishkar's Expertise, going to see our high-powered creatures. We also get that free 5 mana cost from our hand after we have drawn those cards as well, which is really cool. Love that. Disciple of Fraelis, also we can just sacrifice like a larger creature that we may have on the battlefield and draw cards based on their power and gain that much life. Fantastic. Or it can act as a land. And now we're getting into like our kind of nice little techie lands here. So Castle Garenbrig is just a really nice one. It's just a nice ramp spell. It could help us get into War and Collects like a turn earlier, for instance. So we just love that card. It's really nice. And I consider this all our ramp stuff. So here's Mox Amber. Add 1 mana of any color among legendary creatures and planeswalkers you control. That's a nice one for our legendaries like Skrell. We have a couple other legendaries at the bottom end that are really nice with Mox. Even Arwen is just a 3-cost commander, so it's fantastic. Additionally, you have your Soul Ring here, which is this nice little rampage there. Delighted Halfling. We have a lot of abundance of green mana creatures because it works so well with like our collector's cages. We just love instances of creatures. Like we're just gonna, buff up our entire squad. They're just never dead cards that can be ramp tools earlier in the game, and then they can start, kind of getting offensive if they have to. So they're just all here, and they're very nice. Incubation Druid is just a massive card. You simply put a 1/1 counter on this thing, and it will start producing 3 mana of any land that we control could produce. It's really strong for 2 mana. Fantastic. Fanatic of Ronus will see our higher power creatures and start producing for extra mana as well. What an amazing card. Arcane Signet for a little extra ramp. And now, here's some more like basically the cards that they don't put counters on themselves. They just require counters to be put on them. They're basically more passive, but they have very strong abilities. For instance, whenever we gain life, put a 1/1 counter on this creature. So we do that a lot. You could simply put counters on this in general too. Whenever you put one or more 1/1 counters on this creature, draw a card. It triggers only once each turn. So we can figure out ways on the Exemplar, whether opponents want to swing on us, they're going to be deterred because we're going to have a lot of life length and indestructibility with Arwen. So it's going to be very difficult for them. They're going to have to decide if they want to give us cards or not. And there are going to be ways, like, for instance, for us to put, counters on the Exemplar, during our opponent's turn with Arwen as well. So just by sinking in and removing indestructibility counters as we proliferate onto her. So kind of easy stuff there, and it just keeps growing and drawing cards. Additionally, a Generous Pup is also one of those more passive cards, right? It has to have counters put on it. However, once it does meet that requisite, it will put a 1/1 counter on each other creature you control. What a fantastic card. So there's the pups. We got the pup and the Skycath, the Skycath Cub, so we're just all set. I thought the Basking Brute Scale would be kind of fun because we do have so many ways to put counters on creatures. This thing can put counters on itself too, but whenever one or more 1/1 counters are put on a Basking Brute Scale, you may create a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature. So we kind of can go wide there, create more mana. I know we're not playing any like Heliod synergies here, but you might consider it with like that, what we got going on, huh? There's some combos there for sure with that gnarled, whatever it is. Gyre Sage, this one also just wants to see counters being put on it, and then it will produce additional mana for each 1/1 counter on Gyre Sage. Cool. And it'll also just kind of put counters on itself as other creatures with toughness greater than that creature enter. Fantastic. Kami Whispered Hopes. This one's also just interesting because it'll actually have that doubling effect, like kind of like the Hardened Scales, not a doubling effect, but an additional 1/1 counter. Now also, based on this thing's power, it will create that much mana. It's awesome. Awesome card. All right, so we have some tutoring effects. Here's the Worldly Tutor. Search your library for a creature card and reveal that card. Shuffle your library and then put that card on top. Awesome. Time of Need. This one will also, this is from Vahn as well. He hooked us up. You could do like an Eladamri's Call, just to like do any creature, but this is the flavor. We're rolling in the Time of Need, and we're going to fetch up that Vorinclex or whatever other legendary creature we want and just put it simply in our hand for 2 mana. That's fantastic. And Congregation at Dawn, also Vahn. So thanks, man. I want to try these cards out. They seem very interesting. I know this can kind of combo in competitive formats, stacking your deck basically in those 5-color commanders. But for this particular instant, we're just going to be, stacking our deck to have some favorable outcomes. So you just basically take 3 cards from your library, creature cards, and then you can put them on top of your library in any order at instant speed. Fantastic. Here's Boseiju Who Endures. This is just a nice little removal spell here, or land. So we just kind of love the channel effect. It gets reduced by the amount of legendaries on the battlefield, so we can always play that cheaply. Swords to Plowshares, just a nice single target removal. Fantastic. Mana Tithe, just that nice 1 mana interaction. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 1 generic. Fantastic. Bridgeworth's Battle. This is a nice fight spell, or it could be a land. Fantastic. Aura Shards, when we have creatures enter the battlefield, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. That's fantastic too. Witch Enchanter, this was going to destroy target artifact or enchantment when it enters the battlefield, or play it as a land. That's also great. And now we have our beautiful lands here. So, and this is just like the really nice flavor. No in particular like, meaning behind the snow-covered plains. We don't have any payoffs. They're just nice to look at. Really nice ones from the Ice Age. Really beautiful cards here. They don't do it like this anymore, guys. They don't do it like that. And yeah, here's all our rainbow lands, dual lands. So you have the Portico. These are very effective, the Temple and the Lush Portico. Obviously, because they can be fetched up, which are very beautiful. And all these are just very nice. You got the new Verge lands here. Some nice, pretty thicket there. But overall, that is the deck. So let's kind of just do the rundown here. Let me know what you think. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, hit me up with a subscribe. Again, 400 subs, we're going to be doing a giveaway. And it's a nice one, too. It's not like a crappy one. So, I don't know. I don't know if I can treat you guys to such niceness, but I'll try. I'll try to keep it up. But, yeah, this has been fun. So here's all the lands here. Some nice aura shards, our little interaction. Some nice little tutor action here. We have our basically mana production and like kind of passive abilities. Some really nice stuff here. I think we're running about 36 lands or so. So it's really kind of appropriate for what we're doing. Very low to the ground, but also just kind of have like kind of explosive kind of synergies. And probably faster than you'd think, you know, very fast deck, very kind of fast to kind of a headache to go up against, I'll be honest. Fight rigging, all those hideaway cards are just very good. And there's a lot of support for this deck. You know, you see a lot of new cards are here, so. All right. Well, I hope you did like that deck tech. Consider a like for the video, and I'll see you all later. Bye-bye.